Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's 60-minute presentation as part of the Wednesday Rainmaking webinar series by the Women Rainmakers of the ABA Law Practice Division. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending the video in a follow-up email. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A session. Please enter your questions into the question pop-up found by clicking the Q&A button on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen. If we do not get to your question, we will try our best to answer it immediately following the webinar. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the video in a follow-up email. We will also post the video on our blog at lawtechnologytoday.org and YouTube. Considering the current increase in Zoom usage, please be advised that we may experience disruptions during the webinar. Our recommendation is to close out of all other applications and to have Zoom open by itself. Please assist our Women Rainmakers Committee by taking the time to complete the evaluation, which will pop up on your screen immediately after the program. This assists us in developing future programs. We welcome and encourage your input. To start today's program, I would like to introduce the co-chair of the webinar committee for the Women Rainmakers, Carol M. Bass, who will introduce today's panelists. Thank you for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Sasha, and we thank all the Rainmakers around the country who have chosen to learn more about the triumphs and challenges of women in law. Before we begin the program, I want to share with you the mission of the ABA Women Rainmakers, which is to educate professional women about marketing and business development, to provide mentoring opportunities for members, and to provide networking opportunities to build personal and professional relationships. You can find up-to-date information regarding our initiatives and programming by visiting the ABA Women Rainmakers homepage at www.americanbar.org/groups/committees/wr-committee.html. I'm sorry, we usually have a slide for you for that. Today, we are fortunate to have a wonderful panel representing 3 generations of women in law, who will provide insights on the triumphs and challenges of women in law. Today's panelists are Anne E. Collier, Abigail Earthman, and Mariana Dyson. Our moderator today is Sharon D. Nelson. Anne E. Collier is the CEO of Aruda, a firm dedicated to improving culture, collaboration, and communication. Anne is an expert leadership coach, steadfast in her commitment to excellence and her clients' goals. She coaches and delivers programming designed to support individuals, teams, and organizations in amplifying their accomplishments. With confidence, intentionality, and resilience, individuals and organizations alike manifest the extraordinary as they actualize greater financial stability and outcomes. Abigail Earthman is a member of Winstead's Wealth Preservation Practice Group. Abigail handles federal gift and estate tax litigation against the Internal Revenue Service across the country, as well as state fiduciary and probate controversy work in the Texas courts. She also counsels clients nationally regarding complex estate administration and litigation and audit risk minimization. Abigail is a past fellow of the Real Property Trust and Estates Division of the ABA, where she serves as chair of the Tax Litigation and Controversy Committee and Digital Property Committee. Abigail is also an ACTEC Dennis I. Belcher Young Leader. Abigail received her JD from Texas Tech University School of Law and an LLM in taxation from Georgetown. She has represented clients before the United States Tax Court and United States District Courts in the Northern and Southern Districts of Texas. Mariana Dyson is Senior of Counsel at Covington and Burlington LLP and advises large employers in the areas of payroll tax, fringe benefits, and information reporting. After returning to private practice from a stint in the IRS Office of the Associate Chief Counsel, she served on the Commissioner's Information Reporting Program Advisory Committee as the representative of the American Payroll Association. Mariana is the primary author of a treatise on payroll taxes that is scheduled to be released by Thomson Reuters Checkpoint later this year. She's a frequent speaker at Tax Executives Institute, the Southern Federal Tax Institute, and the National Restaurant Association. Today's moderator, Sharon D. Nelson, is the president of Sensei Enterprises, Inc., a digital forensics, cybersecurity, and information technology firm in Fairfax, Virginia. Sharon is the author of the noted electronic evidence blog, Ride the Lightning, and is a co-host of the Legal Talk Network podcast series called The Digital Edge, Lawyers and Technology, as well as Digital Detectives. She is a frequent author, 18 books published by the ABA and hundreds of articles, and speaker on legal technology, cybersecurity, and electronic evidence topics. She was the president of the Virginia State Bar from June 2013 to June 2014, and a past president of the Fairfax Law Foundation and the Fairfax Bar Association. Thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to learn more about the triumphs and challenges of women in law, hearing from 3 generations. And I'll now turn things over to Sharon.
Thank you very much, Carol, for the kind introductions, and welcome everyone. We're going to talk first about the 3 generations, and I want to thank Ann Collier, who was nice enough to come up with some language for me here. So as she points out, every generation forms a collective group that shared the same cultural touchstones, a similar societal history, the same technology, and a shared attitude and reaction against the generation that came before it. Understanding these outlooks, worldviews, motives, and behavioral styles of these generations can give us an important way to understand and support them in the workplace and as they make decisions affecting their personal and professional lives. So Anne came up with these for the baby boomers who were born in 1946 to 1964, and I obviously belong to that group. They grew up in a prosperous and competitive you can do anything era. They were America's first workaholics because it was necessary to be that to get up the ladder. They were competing against many because it is such a large generation, and they learned niceness on overcrowded schoolyards during elementary education. Generation X, born 1965 through 1980, this is a much smaller generation, about half the size of the baby boomers. Gen Xers are the most entrepreneurial and misunderstood generation. They have lived through the many profound economic changes. Their generation is the first generation that were latchkey kids that experienced high divorce rates, had many more women entering the workforce, and had birth control available. They are an extremely resourceful and self-reliant generation. Gen Xers tend to want to get in, get the work done, and get out. Millennials, born 1981 to 2000, are a large generation that came of age during the era of global communication, media saturation, and material excess. They are high-speed stimulus junkies who have just enough skepticism to ask healthy questions and enough political savvy, like the boomers, to know who's who. Their optimism and boldness are refreshing and energizing as they take on the world's problems, trying to make a difference. I obviously, as I said, come from the baby boomers generation, and I will start off with the remark that when I went to Georgetown University Law Center, which I started in 1974, they were forming study groups at that point, and I approached 3 young men who were going to form a study group and asked if I might join the group, and they said having a woman in the group would be a distraction. So I did what I always do and still do. I persisted. So I got them to agree that I could come in on a trial basis. And so I put myself through a sort of examination by the group, and they were all nice men. They just were not well advised on the capacity of women who were law students, and it turned out very nicely in the end, but it was certainly an astonishing start. So let's start with some of our questions from our panelists, and maybe we'll go from the boomers down. So Mariana, then Ann, then Abigail. So this is our first question. With the benefit of hindsight, what would you tell your younger self to do differently, Mariana?
I have pondered this question since we developed it, and I was a little bit relieved that as my older self, as I'm sort of closing out my career, I don't have a lot of regrets about how I sort of navigated. I'm like you, when I went to law school, there were not a lot of women in law school, and I went into a large regional firm and sort of had to navigate my way through it. So I don't, you say, what would you do differently? I'm not second guess that. I will tell you that over time, I have learned I wish I had known more about time management skills. I wish there had been a class on something like that Anne probably could have offered as a class, because I feel like there were missed opportunities because I was doing litigation. I'd get distracted and I would not know how to manage my time to take advantage of everything that was offered to me. That became particularly a critical need for me when I started to have a family, but I really can't say that I could answer this question with any degree of trying to sort of second guess. I was very open at the time. There were people who were trying to help me. They recognized it wasn't easy. Sometimes for a young woman associate, there were 2 women and 18 men in my class, so we kind of got through it together, but there were a lot of people. I was lucky. I had very good mentors that helped me navigate.
Anne?
Well, I think that I may have actually been to law school before either of you, but I was only 6 years old. My mother, who is in the prior generation, a traditionalist, went to law school, started law school in 1972 when I was 6 years old. And when either I was home from school and she couldn't get a babysitter or something, she took me to class, and I would have my coffee can full of crayons. And I really liked corporate law because there was something to take notes on. And that was, by the way, not very well received from the professor. I do remember my mom commenting on that much later. But in terms of, with the benefit of hindsight, and Mariana and I knew each other way back when I was still practicing law. So I practiced for 11 years as a tax lawyer, first at the IRS and then King and Spalding and then Miller and Chevalier. And then stopped in 2002. And for the last 20 years, I've been doing things like, helping lawyers prioritize, which is actually, it's more about priorities, I think, than time and being present. But with the benefit of hindsight, I just wouldn't have been so hard on myself. And I would have tried to have been more confident, because I think my mother was a very stressed out lawyer, like you, Mariana and Sharon, in that first wave of women that practiced law in the Detroit area, which may not have been as progressive as other areas of the country, but she was very, very stressed out. So I have always been very interested in, it's kind of not the problem, but how you deal with it. And I wish I had been more confident. I notice when I coach young associates, they think partners aren't people in some ways, like they're afraid to ask questions. And, so when I do either a team building or if I'm coaching associates who, it's easier to get their time than partners' time, I just say, you got to ask questions. And every partner I've ever worked with has said, if an associate doesn't know, ask a question. But I think that takes confidence. So that's what I would, that's what I would wish on my younger self.
Abigail.
Yeah, so I obviously have the smallest tenure as a lawyer here, and I appreciate your comments about confidence, because I think as women, we push, at least the millennial generation, we push upon ourselves these extremely high expectations, both for the woman that came before us to prove that we can do it too, but also to our male counterparts or our counterparts. So I think that confidence, I know several people who have lots of confidence, but it's something that's developed over time. So getting that kind of from the get-go is really important. And then you were saying ask questions, Anne, which I also agree with. I worked for a particular partner. I'm now her partner, thankfully. And a lot of people like, oh, she's so scared. If you find the partner that you're working for scary, female, male, whatever it is, find a different partner to work for, or approach that partner and be upfront. I find you scary. Let's talk about this. How can I be a better associate to help you? I mean, do you need upfront with it? But my thing is, I wish I asked for more help and be upfront when I'm drowning. I'm a litigator, and I tried to do it all. I was, even in college, I was trying to compress 4 years of college into 2. I was trying to make 3 years of law school 2.5. And that trended right through my associate years. And I think people take the the seriousness of when a law professor says, when you're a first year, you should, say jump out high, way too seriously. You need to ask for help. There's so many, life is too short. And whether you're a woman, male, I don't identify as either, there are so many things going in your life and you don't miss that just because you're so busy at work. There's work and then there's life too.
That's for sure. Well spoken, all three of you. I want to remind our attendees, and we have several hundred of you, that if you want to ask any questions, we'll be taking questions throughout the program. So feel free to enter any that you may have. And Sasha, would you please bring up our first polling question? Tiny words there. Do you think I can read it better on here, I think. Well, you can all read it on your big screen, so that's fine too. Do you think a glass ceiling still exists for attorneys that do not identify? Is this the flexible schedule one?
Yes.
Put that up first.
Yes,
Okay.
put that up first. Okay.
Well,
Do you think
Sorry
flexible
about that.
scheduling? Yeah.
I'll put up the glass ceiling question. I apologize.
that's okay.
Uh-oh.
No problem,
It doesn't
Sasha.
matter.
Do you think a glass ceiling still exists for attorneys that do not identify as male? I didn't exactly make up some of the language there, but that's okay.
Is that a trick question?
I have some, but that wasn't mine. So we're going to give you just a few seconds there to go ahead and fill out that poll, and then Sasha will close it and we will continue. Well, it certainly is an overwhelming answer. Make sure, Sasha, that since I'll be writing an article based on this presentation, make sure, if you would, to make sure that I have the poll results. All right, well, let's go on with the next question. What did you do well in the beginning of your career that's worth sharing? Mariana, what did you do?
This is one thing I did do well, and I don't know, I came from a long line of lawyers, and I think the lawyers in my family told me when I went into the law firm, I went around and I asked for the work. And I tell younger lawyers coming into the practice of law now, we have an environment now where you can actually be in your office and talk to other people in the firm through email and never really know them or see them. And it worked well to have that capability, obviously, during the pandemic. But I warn young lawyers that you really need to have that social side of the practice of law. And this is how you get a lot of neat projects, by sometimes just walking around and speaking to people in the corner of your building if you happen to be in a big firm. And I worked hard, but when I had a few moments, I would just walk the halls, and sometimes I would notice, to Ann's point, some of the senior partners, or to Abigail's point, can be kind of scary, but I would sort of see them in there, and I would not tap on the door, and I'd say, and I introduced myself again, and no job too small. Do you have anything that I could do to help you? I have some downtime. There was a senior partner in my firm who was particularly scary. He was a litigator, and he loved to remove cases, meaning he loved to get them removed. He said no client of ours should ever be in state court. So he was a specialist removing cases from state to federal court. And you have to find a reason, to be able to move. So I learned how to remove cases, okay, doing a couple of things for him. So that was one thing I did well. And I would just give that advice to any young lawyer. Just get out and make sure that you get to know people, and just say to them, I'll try anything. I'll do it, because that's how you learn, but that's how you have the fun with the practice of law.
Absolutely. Anne.
Well, I'm not sure my answer is all that different than Mariana's. As she knows, and anybody who knows me, I'm definitely an extrovert. So for me, the walking around and meeting people was kind of the fun part of client of law practice. And on my evaluations, it always came up that clients love me because I got to know them. And, you know, like a great day for me was a day with a lot of calls and interaction with people. And, you know, other people kind of roll their eyes on that, but the introverts that I practiced with. But I would say that
and there are lots of introverts in the practice of law. It's really it's really interesting. It's a heavily introverted group. So you were an anomaly at Miller and Chevalier.
I definitely was. Hold on one sec. I think, and I also have technology challenges. Hold on one second. There we go. So my other computer came on. It's one of those days. Yeah, I was definitely an anomaly. And that was sort of almost the good and the bad of it, but I'm very curious. So when I think about my work when I was in Chief Counsel's office or in legislative affairs on the commissioner side at the IRS, it was really, really interesting. Like I like figuring out how things work. I sort of became the expert in partnership audit procedures in tax, you know, and that may sound like maybe the worst area of practice ever, but nobody in the tax group at King & Spalding did that work. And I got a case, you know how that happens. And then I sort of became the expert. So I did what Mariana would have suggested to me as I walked around and I told anybody like, hey, I've got this expertise. And if you need any help, I'm here. I also, so in addition to sort of the networking or the building relationships, the being very curious, also just recognizing that there's some value in every project. You learn something about it. You know, life is long. You either build a relationship or the issue comes up again, or it gets you to think about things in a different way. So taking a kind of I guess maybe almost a Zen approach to practicing law always helped me. And in my current, I mean, I run my own business now. So the same thing, you know, things go well, things don't go as well at times, but you know, it's always a good learning experience.
Abigail.
I might have interpreted that question correctly because what I wrote down isn't necessarily having to do with the practice of law, but what surrounds the practice of law. So one thing that I'm very proud of is that I made it very well known in my firm, to my colleagues, to my network, that I care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I did that by being that person to call others out. And you don't have to, you know, make a big stink about it. But, you know, I noticed one time a senior partner wrote, "Hey guys," and I said, you know, in this day and age, just an FYI, "Hey guys," sometimes could offend some people. And I started to do things like that around my firm with other partners. And it's not because I necessarily want to become best with them, it's because I actually, aside from my practice, I have a huge passion for this. And I encourage everyone on here to pick another passion that isn't the law, that's related to the law, so that you can make an impactful change in your community. But by doing that, every partner that I work with now knows for darn sure that I'm the DEI person and that I care a lot about it. So whenever people have questions about it, they also come to me. And I really like being part of that conversation. I make it a priority in my practice to welcome diverse candidates to the firm when they come. I take them out to lunch and talk to them. As a person who is diverse, I really want to pass it along. So I encourage everyone to kind of pick something early on or even late in the game that you care about that isn't necessarily related to law, maybe tangentially related, and how you can change the practice of law for the future.
Well, we have a question which anybody can take, and it is, how do you build a book of business at a large AmLaw 100 firm with 800 plus lawyers? Easy question, right? Everybody's got the answer.
I would like to know the answer to that too.
Yes.
So I think it is a combination of things, and I'm not going to say that sometimes just being lucky and being with the right team and having the right mentors. I think that it is important to be to decide, and made the reference to partnership tax law, which was an interesting point. I picked an area of tax law that not many people do, and I wrote and wrote and wrote about it. And I started being the person that people would invite, like Tax Executives Institute is a good example, come give the speech, talk to us about this. And eventually you get sort of pieces of that action. I do a lot of tax controversy and not consulting. It's also done through referrals, and Abigail and Ann can jump in on this, but I had to be very, very persistent to build it, to make sure I was a member of this organization. I got to know other practitioners in this space, although there aren't that many full-time payroll tax lawyers. But the quick answer is it's hard, and I recognize that, and you can't do it alone. You do have to. It is kind of a village effort, and people in your firms. A lot of these big firms love it if somebody's willing to get out there and sort of grab that niche, and they will be supportive of it. But you do have to explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it, and build that support. But Ann might know how to platform that better. I just sort of stuck with it until they got tired of me and hired me,
And actually, I'm just going to refer you all to a book, and I can't remember what year it was, but there is a Women Rainmakers book. And I interviewed Mariana for the chapter on networking. So that's fun. I'm sure that's still it's still available through the ABA. And your section was clearly the most fun. So a couple of things, and I do coach some partners at these big firms. Networking internally, figuring out where you're going to, figuring out where to spend your time. The networking internally is absolutely critical. I think that just as Abigail said, that becoming trusted, taking on firm responsibility, devoting time to, chairing practice groups or doing some administrative work like managing workload, showing that you're a team player, that you're a good firm citizen is really important. You get recognized that way. People that are the most senior people that are in charge of the work learn to trust you and rely on you and see that you do what you say that you're going to do. I think that's really important. I think it's also very important to figure out where you're going to spend your precious networking time. You have to decide what's worthwhile. Going to, an event where there's a lot of other lawyers like you, unless you have a specialty like Mariana, in which case the other tax lawyers probably do want to hire her because it's really a niche practice, or at least work with her. But figuring out where your clients hang out, hosting events for clients, making efforts to see them in person if they have time. I one time took this client and I were trying to connect when she was in town, and it just wasn't going to work. And she said, I got to go to the airport. And I said, I'm downtown. How about I give you a ride to the airport? So, we had 20 minutes in the car. It's what I see from lawyers most often is they're afraid of doing it wrong. So they get stuck not doing anything.
I think, though, your point is you have to build your own internal constituency, and listening to Abigail, she clearly did that. If you can build that constituency within the firm can be a terrific supporter and platform for your efforts to move externally out and help get that work.
Yeah, because they have lots of resources. They have the resources to spend $20,000 on an event for clients, where you're not going to see that at a smaller firm necessarily.
Right. I'm not gonna lie, I latched on to someone, be bold. I latched on to someone. What I did is I worked very closely with a partner, and I'm gonna be frank, I found out her weaknesses, whether that's technology or responding to clients or, calendaring appointments, whatever it is, I now that strength for her. So we complete each other in a very odd way. We are, everyone who knows me knows the partner that I work with, and the partner that I work with knows me. And she has opened so many doors for me. I wrote a paper on cryptocurrency. It has nothing to do with what I do. I'm in a niche practice. I do gift and estate tax litigation against the IRS, very small, right? And I've given that presentation now over 50 times to various organizations. So find the best person that you can latch to. And most women, and I think there's a question here, will support you. If any woman ever approached me and said, hey, could you help me get this paper, this speech, whatever it may be, I'll jump over hurdles for them.
That we have a question. What if you have had bad luck and assigned to dead end cases and or outside your desired area with no mentor or sponsor to rescue you, and you're working too many hours so you can't take on extra substantive work? Thoughts?
Oh, call me.
That is an awful, awful reality for someone, really, when you think about it. I'm not sure you can correct that from within an organization that lets that happen to a lawyer.
I would say, let's talk about your options. What do you really, I mean, if I were coaching this person, I'd say, let's look at what you really want to do. What is your passion? I mean, the problem is when you're that stressed out, you often don't see that you have any options, but you probably need to look at a different practice. And I will say, as an aside, so remember, my generation is the most independent. So and most entrepreneurial. So it's probably not a surprise that a lot of women my age, including myself, went out on their own somehow, or went to a smaller firm, or just decided, you know, I don't like the way this is going. But you know, you have to just recognize that you have choices. And if you don't have anybody that's mentoring you and you're not in a good position, it's probably time to move on, you know, and do so deliberately, you know, and intentionally, with the idea of finding that support and doing work that you like to do.
We have another question. It's nice to see the questions come in because obviously people are very engaged. What would be your advice to solo practitioners or attorneys in small, less than 10 attorney firms?
Advice in terms of business development?
Well, they don't say, but I would suspect that's what they mean. Just overall rising within the firm and business development. Yeah.
Get involved. Get involved and get people in the community to know you. Volunteering is really, especially if you're for introverts, volunteering is really good because it gives you something to talk about besides yourself. But you got to remember,
join your bar association. Yeah, join your bar association, join the National Bar Association for that particular section. Make your network bigger than that 10 and become indispensable to the people that you work with, and they will want to tap into your network as you develop it.
I think those are very, very good answers. It is sometimes difficult in a smaller firm. And I'll add one thing that has recently come up, and that is that many folks are working from home. And it has been more true for women than men because they're so often caregivers, either of children or elderly parents. And there has become something called proximity bias, where if you're not at work where people physically are, and you guys have talked about the conversations and how things just kind of fall into your lap because you're there, you know, it is something to think about as one way to do well within the firm. And it's hard because you've got these other obligations. So some women are caught in a kind of impossible trap.
Sharon, can I just speak to your proximity bias? FaceTime is a powerful tool. I started FaceTiming some of my partners and they were like, what are you doing? But I work from home quite a bit. And at first they were like shocked. They're like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm FaceTiming you. It's like, I'm here. It's the same exact thing. And it took them a while to get it, to catch on, but it actually has worked really brilliantly and allowed me a lot more flexibility to just get on FaceTime. Like, I'm here, sorry. And we'll work sometimes and she'll answer questions or whomever I'm working with. And then we'll pop back into each other's FaceTime. It's a little invasive sometimes even, but I think it actually does work.
I'm gonna keep that one in mind. Thank you for that. Well, apparently we're going to get a lot of questions here. How do you learn to talk about yourself and your practice when talking about yourself and your practice does not come naturally to you?
I love that question. Have you ever met any of these male lawyers that don't seem to have any trouble talking about themselves? I mean, seriously. That is
exists?
such a great question. Yeah, it can be. I find that what you're trying to do, Anne is very good at this. You know, you're getting to know people, and you certainly want them to talk about themselves, and particularly if you're in a client, you know, a lawyer-client relationship, you want to know. I'm just a very sort of simple-minded person. I'll look and I'll say, what can I do to help you? You know, let's talk about you and your position in the company. And I get them to kind of tell me, what do they need in their lawyers? You know, it's fascinating when you talk to in-house lawyers, how they will feed you information of how they like to interface with their outside lawyers, and that's where my conversations about what I do and how I approach client service, I think that has been huge. I have very frank conversations with my clients about the service model. Let's talk about what you're trying to do. Let's talk about your budget for this. What can you be doing to feed me so that you don't have a situation you can't handle with your budget? So that's, to answer the question, it's a little backwards. I end up sort of sharing information about myself because I'm teasing the information out of them, and I'm keeping it to a client situation, not just a not just a social platform. But that's kind of how I get the information out there. I don't sit there and say I'm Mariana Dyson, blah blah. I'm not that interesting. They're more interesting.
That's not true at all.
No, it's really fun to sort of have them develop that relationship with you. And then you find out that it really is true. It's like 6 degrees of separation. They're going to know somebody or have gone to a school, and you get that sort of personal dialogue going. Then they want to come back and work with you. And one of the funniest things that happened to me during the pandemic, and I don't know if it happened to you all, I had worked with people for years, and my clients are all over the United States, and I'd talk to them on the phone, and but I'd never seen them. Some of them I'd never had a chance to go visit. It just never worked out. And we got on Zoom, and there were a couple of situations. You look like that. I mean, it was really it was a lot of fun. Zoom was actually a godsend, or Teams, whatever you use. So that's how you do it. It's, you get them to kind of talk about themselves, I guess.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I always ask questions first. I mean, part of that's, again, the curiosity, the coach training. But to this participant's question, you prepare for this like any other meeting. And I have a whole process where I go through where I develop talking points for people to use. And so again, it's not like you know how to prepare for a meeting. This happens to just be about you. What is your mission? What is it? Why do you focus in on why do you love your work? How do you do it? Who are you as a leader, a team player, a technician? All of those kinds of things. And it's not like a stilted elevator pitch, but we have sort of this model that we put these talking points into, and then you just use them fluidly in a conversation, the conversation that Mariana is having, for example.
We have a lot of canned questions here that we had prepared, ladies, but I think we have a lot of interest in answering specific questions. So with your indulgence, I'm going to let the questions come and we'll just get as far as we can. As an associate, how do you suggest dealing with struggling to get work billable hours after conversations with partners do not lead to any results?
You mean in terms of getting, I think you have to look at whether there's a need for your practice area. I mean, frankly, I try to always zoom out and look at the bigger picture and the landscape. Are you at the right firm? Are you at the right platform? Is the firm the right platform for your skill set? Are you clicking with someone that's going to mentor you, that kind of thing. But if you're in an entrepreneurial firm, as they like to call them, and you're an associate trying to get business and hours and you're not getting it, you probably need to talk to your practice group chair and talk about the challenges and what you need to be doing differently, but kind of make it their problem too, would be my strategy.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It goes back to, I guess, my generation, which is optimism and boldness. So be bold, right? So go to your PGL, say, I don't have enough work. I've asked for work, I haven't received it, because then at least come compensation or whatever, you've talked to the right person ahead of time and you're being proactive about it. I dislike people who come after the fact. I'm like, I was like, no one told me. You got to talk about it and be bold about it. And then I lost my train of thought there. So I'm going to let someone else jump in, but be bold and talk to your PGL most certainly. And don't log your time. People don't do this. I don't know why. And I was very bad as an associate. Log your non-billable time in your system so that partners don't think you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. Become an expert with that extra time. If you're truly not getting billable work, find some CLEs, become an expert in one niche area, and then share that and say, we can expand our business offerings. And, I do estate and gift tax. Let's say I didn't do income tax or trust and estates, right? I can expand now because I'm an expert in this niche area.
Well, what I recommend, if there is an area or an issue that interests you, is they may not be giving you the billable time. And sometimes it's because the senior lawyers in the firm are so busy, they're juggling. You know that sense that you have when you're so busy, you don't even have the time to explain what you need help with to somebody. It happens to all of us. But if you have that downtime but you still see something that interests you, go to that partner and say, look, I want to write an article on such and such. We have tax notes. I know that every practice area has this. And would you be the author and let me be the co-author? I will do the heavy lifting on this, but you're going to have to read it. Your name is going to be on it. You're going to help with that. And what it does is it forces an interaction on a substantive issue, and you learn something along the way. I found in writing a book that I was like, wow, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I didn't know it quite worked that way, or why it worked that way. It was more of a why. So I do think that before you kind of give up, think about what are the strategies that you can do to get the conversation going with some of the people you'd like to work with. And it can be offering up something that would be published, for example.
And we do have yet another question. Now, this one was put in the chat, so I'd like to remind our audience to please put it in the question and answers box, because I can't read it.
Do you need a polling? But Sharon, do you need a polling question about now?
Well, we could use a polling question. That's for sure. We can do that.
240. Yeah.
Yeah. Could we put up our second polling question? How many hours do you typically work a week? This will be interesting.
Looking at that question, it reminds me when I started practicing law, the aversion of any law firm to permit women to work part-time was prevalent. In other words, there was not I can remember when, here we go, look at this. This is still pretty typical, of how hard we work. But I am so thrilled in sort of the many decades I've been doing this, to see law firms open to these flexible work arrangements, to part-time. There was no such thing as a woman becoming a partner if she were part-time. It just would not have ever happened at all. Not that it was just delayed, just at all.
We have actually two more questions. Do you want, ladies, would you like me to ask the third polling question now so that we can go back to the questions? And that way we'll have all our polling. Okay, I'm hearing yes. So go ahead and put up our third poll, please. Or Sasha, I'm working her overtime. Okay. Do you think flexible scheduling forces you to work more or equal to a traditional schedule? Oh, interesting.
Oh, I would have predicted that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think most people do say they work more.
Yeah.
And it's been a common result. Well, let me go back to the original question, and we have two behind it. What advice do you have for female partners seeking to grow their book and move into equity, but not being able to access the women-owned business incentives to do so because they are not yet equity? How can we help empower women to get them into the equity positions? Anyone? Anyone?
No, I'm trying to think about the question.
Yeah.
That is about 3 questions in one, really.
Yeah. Well, Mariana, you've done it. So
Well, it's interesting. I think that it's a lot of the things we've talked about this morning in terms of every step that you have to take, and you have to be strategic, and you have to network and all of that. I was, before I came to Covington, I was at Miller and Chevalier, and I do think it's and I just think it's a lot of spade work, you know, in terms of figuring out and I say spade work and not just hard work and hours. It's sort of figuring out how to make the choices and how to invest your time. That's why I talk about time management was something I wish I had been better at understanding, and finding the right mentor can be critical. So
yeah, that's key. I actually I think about some of the mentors that I had. Fred Robinson being one of my favorite.
Oh.
He was sort of grumpy, but I really are viewed as grumpy. But it's also reminding me. I do a lot of work with boards and organizations overseen by boards, and so whenever anything's going to happen on the board, you know, you're going to decide who the next chair is, or the secretary, or the treasurer. I'm not going to say it's wired, but when you get to the meeting, it is almost a done deal. And so if you apply that to making equity partner, it's having volunteered enough that people know you, they're reliable, they trust you, they know that you're going to be a net contributor to the firm, that kind of thing. So, you know, I'm just echoing what Mariana said about the spade work, but it does remind me a little bit of going in for a board vote on something.
I'm still going back to being bold. So I'm a recently minted shareholder partner, and obviously my goal is to get to equity. Like 6 months into being a partner, the first thing I did is went to the equity partner and said, what do I need to do? What's my next step? Chart out what you want to do and what you want to accomplish in the years becoming there, and figure out what it takes to be there. So like, Anne, as you said, it's not a question when you walk in for equity, it's a shoe-in. You just walk in and you're like, I know I'm going to become equity. You should be very confident in that because you've already stacked the deck in your favor. So plan early and check in often. You know, if the person that you work with or around all know that you want to get there, they're going to help you get there. And if you have those benchmark check-ins to say, am I still on track? Am I doing things right? You know, is my book big enough? Is it trending in the right direction? Compare yourself to other books. Did it trend exactly the same? Not the exact same, but you have examples in front of you. Just start following those and maybe deviate a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting though. The question is a good question, and when I said it was 2 or 3 questions in one, that question reveals the understanding that even when you're in a firm, you're a business within a business. You know what I mean? You're trying to own a part of that business, but you have to have your own business, and that's the challenge. You know, it's very, very difficult and can take time.
That folks have come up with some really interesting questions. And the next one says, I am one of the blessed ones in a small firm, 6 attorneys total, and I have the opposite issue. I'm drinking from a fire hose. I have less than 2 years of experience, and I am quickly being pushed into a leadership position, which I love. But do any of you have any literature or online suggestions on law firm management or other business management / expansion that you have found useful?
So can I pitch the Women Rainmakers Committee, all of our resources, and I'm a shameless promoter, and not productivity and knowledge strategy committee of the ABA. We're all part of the law practice division. We do a lot of programming that way. So I'm going to say there's lots of resources there. That's what the participant asked for. Then I would also say, if you just going back to some of the early questions, Mariana's advice, my advice, Abigail's advice, be really intentional, be bold, but really figure out how you're going to manage your day and manage to prioritize and focus there, and learn to delegate and take advantage of some, you've only got 6 partners, but, and you may have to decide you're not going to do certain things. It's as much about what you're going to do as what you're not going to do.
I think having that conversation early on is important, especially if this person's feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work. talk to the partners, tell them how much you enjoy working there, but you can't sustain this for the long run. I think people really appreciate frankness. Like, I love working here and I love working for you, but if you want me in 6 years, I can't work 2,900 hours a year. It's just not going to work out in the long run. I think people appreciate that. Get an intern. I mean, you come up with novel ideas to that you can downstream to. People love free work. So if you suggest like a law clerk or something like that to help you out in the short term.
We're getting, it's great to get these questions because you know what, canned questions are great and we had them and they're all good questions, but these are real life questions. And I think people value that they're getting some answers. So what advice do you have for a young female partner that is feeling discouraged by firm politics and the inability to continue growing as a lawyer? What is the next goal? How do we become more relevant to the practice in the firm?
Well, I love Abigail's advice about being bold. And you know, in my generation, sort of famous for bucking the system. So if you're committed to staying at the firm, you want to ask how you can get involved, you know, and be more involved, and get more attention and get more raise your profile. I think that's really important. And I lost part of the question. These questions.
Well, I think I think some of the question was about the politics. You know, some firms can be very political. I've been in a number of firms, and that's the one thing I appreciate about Covington is how well run the firm is, and how strategic they are about inclusion and wanting to make sure that people have opportunities. But sounds like she's got a situation where she's newly minted, again, to use your term, she's newly minted, and she's running in where she would like to make a difference and be a part of this, and in the politics is sort of sucking her into that vortex. That's tough. That is really tough. And
you got to figure out who can advise you. I think, you know, who's going to tell you what the politics are.
If you're experiencing this, most likely someone at your firm is also experiencing this. So find perhaps another junior partner, newly minted female partner, and ask them, you know, what do you think about this? What can we do together? Misery loves company to an extent, and I promise there's another person at your firm experiences, and maybe you can make change despite what you think in the politics. I remember as an associate going through associate compensation changes. Every associate just banded together, and then we, at some point, every office had a representative changing associate compensation.
Oh, associates are the most powerful lawyers in the United States right now. I love that analogy. I think, though, you have to be careful, Abigail, to your point. You try to find what other people are experiencing, but you have to be careful because sometimes those actions can be interpreted as aligning yourself with a faction that you never intended to align with. You know, you're trying to be Switzerland and figure out what is going on. Can I ask a question, Sharon? This is one question that we had that I would love to hear what Abigail and Ann have to say about it. And it was what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given as a woman lawyer?
You read my mind because I was going to that question.
Yeah, before we close out, I'm sorry, Sharon, I didn't mean that, you know, you have your role here and I'm supposed to have mine. And I have to tell you, the very first associate review I got just sort of stuck with me, and I guess it stayed with me, and Ann knows is I was written on there, you know, she's basically capable, but she's insufficiently servile. Okay. Some guy wrote that. I mean, some partner wrote that. And I looked at that and I thought, yeah, go girl. You know, I'm insufficiently servile. But what is the best? I'd love to hear what your best advice has been. That would be fun.
My father, who I've always been very close to and am still close to, is a lawyer, and he's kind of fun. Women always liked working with him because he was just he was a real person. He was not scary. So his advice, which I would say is the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, was don't let the bastards get you down.
Yeah.
Good advice. Good advice. What about you, Abigail?
Yeah, so mine is actually just lawyer centered, but I heard it from a law professor and he said, be the best. Be the best so you can help others be their best. I'm a pretty stringent person that if you're going to practice law, especially in the competitive nature that we're in with our male counterparts, you have got to be the best at what you do. And that goes down to detail. And that just resonates throughout your career. If you're the best first year associate in your class, I guarantee you, you're going to get so much work and have so much credibility as you move up your ladder. And people will trust you and you'll build that relationship. So all the stuff that we've talked about today will just fall in place naturally.
Mariana?
One of the best pieces of it, I've got several, but one that was most amusing to me was I was on a team, a litigation team, and I may have been the only, no, there were two women on the team. We were both associates, and a client turns to me, and after we'd listened to everything, and he says, I want to know what your opinion is. Look, looking at me as he says, he says, it is okay to think like a woman. It was his comment to me to add that dimension to this problem. And I found out later that he had a very strong mother and that he just felt like his mother should have been the Secretary of State. She was so wise about things. And he says, I always put my legal teams together to make sure that I can get them. He says, I think women think more broadly, that we have, this is why I think it's so very important that women be in the law and be parts of teams and run law firms and be advisors, because there is a dimension that we, I think, have very often that others don't. I mean, and I know that sounds sexist, so that maybe you want to take that out of the tape. Or what, I mean, it sounds very, but women are just valuable legal advisors. There's just something about that dimension that we can bring that clients and other people will benefit from.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to turn this back over to Carol in just a second, but I will add my own piece of advice that I got from my father. Fathers obviously give good advice. He told me, because there were so few women in the field, he said, I want you to knock on the door. And if they don't let you in, I want you to knock harder. And if they still don't let you in, I want you to kick the goddamn door down.
Don't apologize.
So
also, don't apologize for being bold. I think
exactly.
Don't apologize.
Thank you all very much. What a great job. Carol, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon and Abigail and Mariana, for that really great presentation, and to our audience for those great questions. And just, I'm going to go off script for a second as you're all talking about the advice, and say, one of my favorite quotes is from Charlie Chisholm, and it was, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So if you have any questions for our panel, their contact information is in the materials provided. We sincerely appreciate your interest in our webinar series, so please stay on the webinar to give us your feedback. Please feel free to reach out to me or to Vita, the co-chairs of the webinar program, if you have any questions. And we hope you will join us again on September 21st for our next webinar. Thank you, and here's to your successful rainmaking. Sasha, over to you.
That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our Women Rainmakers Committee and everyone for attending our webinar today. I'd also like to thank Sharon, Anne, Abigail, and Mariana for presenting today. We will now conclude the webinar.